Story 1. The Candle in the Window. My name is Alice, and I've never been one for ghost stories. I always thought they were just tales spun to scare kids or pass the time on cold nights. But after what happened to me and my friends, Ben, Derek, and Sophia, in those woods last autumn, I can't dismiss them anymore. The memory of that night clings to me like damp fog, and I need to tell someone, anyone, what we saw. Maybe writing it down will loosen its grip on me. Maybe it won't, but I have to try. It started with a dare, as stupid things often do. The four of us were restless, cooped up in our small town where nothing ever happened. Sophia, always the curious one, had heard whispers about an old cabin deep in the woods, a place the locals avoided. They called it the Hollow, a patch of forest where the trees grew gnarled and the air felt wrong. The story went that on certain nights a light flickered in the cabin's window, a single candle that burned without reason in a place no one had lived in for decades. Some said screams echoed from the woods. Others spoke of a mist that swallowed anyone who got too close. I didn't believe it, not really. Ben laughed it off, saying it was probably just kids messing around. Derek, ever the skeptic, thought it was a prank with a battery-powered light. But Sophia's eyes gleamed with that spark she got when she wanted to chase a mystery. "Let's go see it," she said, and like fools, we agreed. We set out just before dusk, the sky bruising purple as we trekked into the hollow. The woods were dense, the kind of place where the trees seemed to lean in, their branches clawing at the fading light. Thorns snagged at our clothes, and the ground was uneven, littered with stones that looked too much like broken headstones. I tried to joke about it, but my voice sounded thin, swallowed by the silence of the forest. Ben led the way, his flashlight beam cutting through the growing dark, while Derek muttered about how we were wasting our time. Sophia was quiet, her eyes scanning the trees like she was expecting something to step out of them. After what felt like hours, we saw it. A faint golden glow pulsing through the undergrowth. The cabin. It squatted in a small clearing, its wooden walls sagging under the weight of time, moss creeping up the splintered planks. The window was caked with grime, but there it was, a single candle burning steady and bright on a table inside, casting shadows that danced across the glass. My stomach twisted. There was no reason for that light to be there, no wires, no power lines, no sign of anyone. Just the candle, burning like it had been waiting for us. "Who's going in first?" Ben asked, his usual bravado faltering. His flashlight trembled slightly in his hand. "Me," I said before I could think better of it. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted to prove I wasn't scared, or maybe I just wanted to get it over with. The others followed as I stepped toward the door. Its hinges rusted and warped. I pushed, and it groaned open, the sound scraping through the silence like a blade. The air inside hit us like a slap. It was cold, not just autumn cold, but a bone-deep chill that made my breath catch. And the smell. God, the smell. It was sharp, chemical, like something you'd find in a lab gone wrong. It burned my nose, coated my throat, made my eyes water. Sophia coughed, her hand over her mouth while Derek gagged, muttering something about toxic fumes. Ben shone his flashlight around, but the beam seemed to drown in the darkness, catching only motes of dust that hung in the air like tiny ghosts. The candle sat on a table in the center of the room, its flame unwavering despite the draft from the open door. Around it were stacks of books, their covers cracked and yellowed, maps curling at the edges, papers scattered like someone had left in a hurry. I stepped closer, my heart hammering so loud I was sure the others could hear it. The maps were strange, hand-drawn, with lines that didn't match any place I knew, marked with symbols that made my head ache to look at. The books were worse. Their titles were in languages I couldn't read, the letters twisting in ways that felt wrong, like they weren't meant for human eyes. "Alice, don't touch anything," Sophia whispered, her voice tight. But I was already reaching for one of the books, drawn to it like a moth to a flame. My fingers brushed the cover, and for a moment nothing happened. Then Derek, standing beside me, grabbed another book from the pile. He barely had time to open it before it burst into flames. The fire wasn't normal. It flared blue and green, licking up the pages faster than paper should burn. Derek screamed, dropping the book as it crumbled to ash in his hands. The candle's flame surged, casting wild shadows across the walls, and then the noise started, a low, keening wail that grew into a chorus of thousands. It wasn't just sound. It was pressure, like the air itself was screaming. I clapped my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. The wails were inside my head, clawing at my thoughts. And then I saw them. Faces, dozens, hundreds, swirling in the flickering light. They were blue, translucent, their eyes empty sockets, their mouths stretched in silent screams. They darted across the walls, through the air, circling us like vultures. I couldn't tell if they were real or just shadows twisted by the candle's glow, but they felt real. They felt like they were watching us, hating us. Ben shouted something I couldn't hear over the wails, his flashlight beam swinging wildly, catching glimpses of those faces, old, young, men, women, all distorted in agony. "Run!" I yelled, my voice barely cutting through the noise. We stumbled toward the door, the chemical stench choking us, the cold biting at our skin. The faces followed, their movements frantic, their mouths snapping open and closed like they wanted to swallow us whole. I felt something brush my arm, icy, weightless, but real, and I screamed, shoving past Sophia to get out. The woods outside were no better. The mist had thickened, curling around the trees like a living thing, and the wails followed us, echoing through the branches. Thorns tore at my jacket, my legs, my face, but I didn't stop. None of us did. We ran blind, crashing through the undergrowth, the candle's glow still burning in my mind like a brand. I don't know how long we ran, only that the screams faded little by little until we burst into a clearing bathed in pale moonlight. The air was clean again, the silence almost painful after the noise of the cabin. We collapsed, gasping, our flashlights scattered on the ground. My hands were shaking, my throat raw from the chemical stench. Sophia was crying, quiet sobs that made her shoulders shake. Ben stared back at the woods, his face pale, while Derek clutched his hand, the skin red and blistered where the book had burned him. "What the hell was that?" Derek whispered, his voice hoarse. No one answered. We didn't have words for it. The cabin, the candle, the faces, they didn't fit into anything we knew. We stumbled back to town as dawn broke, the sky gray and heavy. The woods were silent again, the mist gone, the cabin hidden somewhere in the trees. We didn't talk about it, not really. Ben tried to joke about it later, but his laugh was hollow. Sophia stopped going out at night. Derek's hand healed, but he flinches at the sight of open flames now. And me? I can't sleep without checking my windows, half expecting to see that candle's glow staring back. A week later, I went back, alone. I don't know why. Maybe I needed to prove it was real, that we hadn't imagined it. The hollow was quieter this time, the air heavier. I found the cabin, but the window was dark, no candle, no light. The door was shut, and I didn't dare open it. But as I turned to leave, I heard it, a single, faint wail, like a whisper carried on the wind. I ran, and I haven't been back since. The locals still talk about the cabin, about the light that comes and goes. They don't know what we saw, and I'm not sure I want them to. Some things are better left in the dark. But I can't shake the feeling that the candle is still burning somewhere, waiting for someone else to find it. And those faces, they're still out there, trapped in the walls of that cabin, screaming for someone to hear them. Story 2, Tranquility, Lost. My name is Rachel, and I was 20 years old when the world I knew shattered. My family's cabin in Oakley, Utah, was our haven, a place we called Tranquility for its untouched peace. Tucked 2.5 miles from the nearest road, it was so remote we could only reach it by snowmobile in winter. The sound of the river, the crunch of snow underfoot, the chatter of birds, it was heaven on earth. That Christmas week in 1990, my sister Lily, just 16, and I were buzzing with excitement as we prepped the cabin for the holidays. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm glow over the log walls. Mom had hung our stockings by the mantel, and the scent of pine from the Christmas tree filled the air. Outside, the snow was deep, our snowmobile tracks the only marks in its pristine surface. It felt like we were the only souls for miles. Lily and I had just returned from a quick trip down the mountain to grab supplies. The snowmobile's engine still hummed in my ears as we stomped snow off our boots on the porch. Inside, Mom and Grandma were bustling about, their laughter echoing from the kitchen. The cabin was alive with warmth, the kind that makes you feel untouchable. I was hauling a box of decorations when I caught a flicker of movement out of the corner of my eye, a shadow darting behind the refrigerator. My stomach twisted. "Lily," I whispered, nudging her. She froze, her eyes wide, following my gaze. Before we could move, the air shifted. Heavy. Wrong. Footsteps thudded from the back of the cabin. 2 men emerged from the shadows, their faces hidden behind dark masks, rifles glinting in the firelight. My heart slammed against my ribs. Mom and Grandma had just reached the top of the stairs when one of the men raised his gun. "What do you want?" Mom's voice trembled, but she stepped forward, hands raised. "I'll give you anything." Her words hung in the air for a heartbeat before gunfire exploded through the cabin. The sound was deafening, a brutal crack that swallowed every other noise. I saw Mom stagger, her body crumpling to the floor. Blood bloomed across her sweater. I turned, my scream catching in my throat, just in time to see Grandma collapse, a red mist spraying across the pine floorboards. The world slowed, every detail searing into my mind. The thud of her body, the glint of the intruders' eyes through their masks, the acrid smell of gunpowder. "Move!" one of the men barked, his voice rough as gravel. He grabbed me, the cold barrel of his rifle pressing into my back. Lily whimpered beside me, her face pale, eyes darting to the bodies on the floor. I wanted to run to Mom, to shake her, to make her get up, but the man's grip tightened. "Don't try anything," he snarled. The other intruder, shorter and wiry, was already rifling through the cabin, stuffing valuables into a bag. My mind raced. How long had they been here? The half-eaten food on the counter, the torn wrapping paper under the tree. It hit me like a punch. They'd been hiding, waiting for us. Outside, the faint whine of a snowmobile grew louder. My heart leapt. Dad and Lily's friend Sarah were coming back from gathering fuel. The intruders froze, their heads snapping toward the sound. "Get them out!" the taller one hissed. They shoved us toward the door, rifles jabbing into our spines. My legs felt like lead, but I grabbed Lily's hand, her fingers ice cold in mine. We stumbled into the freezing night, the snow glowing faintly under the moonlight. The intruders were panicking now, their movements jerky. "Get on the snowmobiles!" the wiry one shouted. I climbed onto one, my hand shaking so badly I could barely grip the handles. The taller man slid on behind me, his breath hot against my neck. Lily was forced onto the other snowmobile, the wiry man clinging to her back. The engines roared to life, and we tore down the trail, the cold biting at my face. My mind was a blur of terror and desperation. I kept glancing at Lily, her face a mask of fear as she gripped the handlebars. The men were shouting at each other over the wind, their words lost in the howl of the engines. I tried to think, to plan. The main road was miles away, and the snow was deep. If we could just hold on, maybe we could find a way out. The cabin was already fading into the distance, its warm glow replaced by an eerie orange flicker. My stomach dropped. They'd set it on fire. Smoke curled into the sky, the smell of burning wood mixing with the crisp winter air. We sped through the forest, the trees a blur of black and white. My hands ached from gripping the snowmobile, but I didn't dare slow down. The man behind me kept his rifle pressed against my side, a constant reminder of the danger. I could hear Lily's snowmobile just behind us, its engine straining. I wanted to scream to her, to tell her we'd be okay, but my voice was trapped in my throat. The trail was narrow, winding through dense pines, and every turn felt like it could be our last. I kept thinking about Dad and Sarah. Had they reached the cabin yet? Did they see the fire? Would they know what happened? After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, we hit a fork in the trail. I hesitated, my mind racing. The man behind me jabbed the rifle harder. "Keep going," he growled. But something in me snapped. I couldn't let this go on. I swerved hard, aiming for a snowbank. The snowmobile tipped, and the man cursed, tumbling off into the snow. I didn't stop to look back. "Lily, now!" I screamed, praying she'd hear me. Her snowmobile veered, and I caught a glimpse of her kicking at the man behind her. He flailed, losing his grip, and she gunned the engine, pulling up beside me. We raced into the tree line, the snowmobile struggling in the deep powder. The men were shouting, their voices fading as we pushed deeper into the forest. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would burst. Branches clawed at my face, and the cold burned my lungs, but I kept going. Lily was right beside me, her face set with determination. We didn't know where we were going, only that we had to get away. The snowmobiles finally gave out, the engine sputtering in the thick snow. We abandoned them and ran, our boots sinking with every step. The men's shouts were distant now, swallowed by the wind and the trees. Dawn was breaking, the sky turning a pale gray. My legs burned and my chest heaved, but we kept moving, hand in hand. I didn't know if the intruders were still chasing us or if they'd given up. All I knew was that we had to find help. The forest was silent except for our ragged breathing and the crunch of snow. Then, faintly, I heard it, the low hum of an engine. My heart sank, thinking it was them. But as the sound grew closer, I saw a figure on a snowmobile bundled in a familiar red jacket. It was Uncle Randy. "Rachel! Lily!" he shouted, his voice cracking with relief. He'd been heading to the cabin for a visit when he saw the smoke. We collapsed into his arms, trembling, our words tumbling over each other as we tried to explain. He bundled us onto his snowmobile and took off toward the main road. My mind was a fog of grief and adrenaline. Mom and Grandma were gone. The cabin, our sanctuary, was gone. And Dad, I didn't know if he'd made it out. When we reached the road, a sheriff's deputy was already there, alerted by a passing driver who'd seen the smoke. Randy told them everything we'd babbled to him, and soon more deputies arrived, their radios crackling. They found Dad, alive but badly injured, near the cabin. He'd been shot and burned, but had managed to crawl to safety. The intruders, it turned out, had crashed their stolen car not far from where we'd escaped. They were caught, their masks and bravado stripped away. The days that followed were a blur. Lily and I stayed with Randy, our bodies bruised and our minds haunted. The cabin was a smoldering ruin, its charred remains a stark contrast to the snow around it. The pine floorboards, the stockings, the Christmas tree, all gone. The silence of that winter night was no longer peaceful. It was heavy with the echoes of our screams. I can still see Mom's face, her pleading eyes, and Grandma's crumpled form. I can still feel the cold metal of the rifle against my back, the weight of Lily's hand in mine. We survived, but Tranquility was lost forever. The cabin was rebuilt eventually, but it was never the same. Lily and I carry the scars, not just on our bodies, but in the quiet moments when the memories creep back. The mountains are still there, the river still flows, but the peace we once knew is just a ghost drifting through the pines. Story 3, The Forefinger of Death. The Appalachian wilderness stretched before me, a tangle of ancient pines and shadowed hollows, whispering secrets older than the mountains themselves. I'd come to this remote corner of North Carolina to write an article on Cherokee folklore, chasing stories that clung to the ridges like morning mist. My rented hunting cabin, a weathered structure of gray logs and creaking boards, sat alone on a forested slope, miles from the nearest town. It was October, and the air carried a crisp bite, the leaves blazing red and gold under a sky so clear it felt like it could shatter. I'd spent the day on the porch, poring over notes from an old mountaineer I'd met at a market in Highlands. His voice, rough as gravel, had carried a warning that stuck with me. If the air turns cold without warning, or a distant rumble echoes through the trees, don't ignore it. Could be Spearfinger, he'd said, eyes narrowing. The name sent a chill through me, though I chalked it up to the charm of local storytelling. He described her as a shapeshifter, a witch with stone-like skin and a pulsating heart in her right hand. Her forefinger, he claimed, was long and obsidian-sharp, capable of piercing flesh to steal livers. "No trap can hold her," he'd muttered, "and she's clever, tricks you into thinking she's harmless." I scribbled it all down, half smiling at the tale's grim flare, but his final words lingered. "If you see her, boy, you'd best run." That night I sat by the firelight, the cabin's single room glowing faintly orange. My notebook lay open, filled with fragments of Cherokee legends about Spearfinger's deadly finger and her ability to mimic voices or forms to lure victims. The forest outside was alive with sound: crickets, rustling leaves, the occasional hoot of an owl. I was halfway through a sentence when the air shifted. The temperature plummeted as if someone had opened a window to winter. The crickets fell silent. A low, distant rumble rolled through the valley like stones grinding deep in the earth. I froze, the mountaineer's warning flashing in my mind. It was probably nothing. A storm brewing, a trick of the wind. But my pulse quickened. I stood, grabbing my flashlight, and stepped onto the porch. The forest was still, unnaturally so, the kind of quiet that presses against your eardrums. Then, faintly, I heard it, a soft sobbing, drifting from the direction of the creek 100 yards downslope. It sounded human, fragile, like someone in distress. My first instinct was to help. Maybe a hiker was lost or injured. I hesitated, glancing at my notes about Spearfinger's tricks, but the sobbing grew sharper, more desperate. Against my better judgment, I slipped on my boots, tucked my hatchet into my belt, and followed the sound. The moonlight carved a silver path through the pines, guiding me to the creek's edge. The water gurgled softly, reflecting slivers of light. The sobbing was louder now, coming from a patch of tall weeds. I swung my flashlight's beam and caught a glimpse of movement. A frail figure crouched low, clutching a bundle of rags. "Please, help me," a voice croaked, thin and trembling. I stepped closer, my light illuminating an old woman. Her face was gaunt, her hair a tangle of gray strands. Her left hand gripped the rags tightly, but her right hand, something was wrong with it. The fingers were too long, the forefinger unnaturally sharp and knobby, like a blade of blackened bone. Veins bulged beneath her papery skin, pulsing faintly. I froze, my breath catching. The mountaineer's words echoed, her deadly forefinger. "Are you hurt?" I managed, my voice unsteady. She didn't answer, only whimpered, her head bowed. I took a cautious step forward, the hatchet's weight at my side suddenly reassuring. The flashlight's beam trembled in my grip as I studied her hand again. It wasn't right. Too long, too sharp, too wrong. Then, slowly, she raised her head. Her eyes were sunken, glassy, like pits of shadow. Her lips parted, revealing teeth stained dark with something that glistened like blood. A low growl rumbled from her throat, not human, not animal, something else. My heart slammed against my ribs. Before I could move, she straightened, her frail form unfolding into something taller, leaner, her rags falling away to reveal stone-gray skin that shimmered faintly in the moonlight. "Where are you, boy?" she hissed, her voice no longer weak, but sharp, mocking, layered with an echo that wasn't hers. She lunged, a blur of motion, her obsidian finger slashing through the air. I stumbled backward, branches snapping underfoot as I scrambled toward the cabin. My flashlight fell, its beam spinning wildly across the trees. The hatchet was in my hand now, gripped so tightly my knuckles ached. Her laughter, low, guttural, followed me, weaving through the pines like smoke. I reached the clearing around the cabin, my breath ragged, and pressed my back against the porch railing. The forest was silent again, but I could feel her out there watching, waiting. I didn't sleep. I sat on the porch, hatchet in hand, every rustle of leaves setting my nerves on edge. At dawn, I ventured back to the creek, half convinced I'd imagined it. But there, In the grass was a smear of black, tar-like blood, glistening wetly. My stomach churned. I scanned the trees, but there was no sign of hurt. The mountaineer had said the Cherokee once trapped Spearfinger and struck her heart, the one in her hand, to kill her. I didn't know if I believed it, but the image of that pulsing, twisted finger wouldn't leave me. The next night, I stayed inside, barring the door with a chair. The fire crackled, casting shadows that danced across the walls. I tried to write, to focus on my article, but my hand shook too much to hold the pen. Around midnight, the air grew cold again. The fire dimmed as if starved of oxygen. Then came the sound, a faint scratching at the window like a branch tapping in the wind. But there was no wind. I gripped the hatchet, my eyes locked on the glass. The scratching stopped, replaced by a voice, soft and pleading, just outside the door. "Help me, I'm lost." It was the same voice from the creek, but I wasn't falling for it twice. I stayed still, barely breathing. The voice grew louder, angrier, until it wasn't a voice at all, but a snarl, deep and guttural. The door rattled, the chair sliding an inch. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would burst. Then, silence. I waited, minutes stretching into hours, until the first light of dawn crept through the window. The chair was still in place, but the door frame bore deep scratches like claw marks. I couldn't stay another night. I packed my things, my hands trembling, and hiked to the creek one last time. The black blood was gone, washed away by the water or something else. But as I turned to leave, I saw it. A small evergreen near the bank, its trunk scarred with fresh cuts. I hadn't touched it. My breath caught as I approached, the hatchet heavy in my hand. Carved into the bark was a crude shape, a long, sharp finger dripping with sap that looked too much like blood. I swung the hatchet, aiming for the carving, as if destroying it could erase what I'd seen. The blade bit deep, and the tree seemed to shudder. A low, distant rumble echoed through the valley just like the first night. I didn't wait to see what came next. I ran, my bag slung over my shoulder, and didn't stop until I reached my car, miles down the mountain. As I drove away, the forest seemed to watch me, its silence heavier than ever. Back in town, I tried to write my article, but the words wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her. Those glassy eyes, that jagged finger. I left Highlands the next day, my notes abandoned in the cabin. The forest stayed quiet, but sometimes late at night, I hear a faint sobbing or feel a sudden chill, and I wonder if she's still out there, waiting for someone else to answer her call. Story 4. Whispers in the Walls. I'd always dreamed of a writer's retreat, a place where the world's noise would fade and my words could flow uninterrupted. So when I found the listing for a remote mountain cabin, a one-room log hideaway with wooden floors, a stone hearth, and a view of endless stars, I booked it without hesitation. It was perfect, isolated, no internet, no distractions, just me, my notebook, and the quiet. The drive up was long, winding through dense pines that swallowed the road. By the time I arrived, dusk was settling, painting the sky in deep purples. The cabin sat alone in a clearing, its dark logs blending into the forest. I carried my bags inside, the air sharp with the scent of cedar and earth. The first night felt like a gift. Crickets hummed outside, and the stars glittered like shattered glass. I lit a fire, spread my notes across the small wooden table, and wrote until my eyes grew heavy. The silence was a balm, wrapping around me as I crawled into the creaky bed and pulled the quilt to my chin. But as I drifted toward sleep, a faint sound pricked my ears. Tap, tap, tap. It came from the woods, rhythmic and deliberate, like someone striking a tree with a stick. I lay still, my breath shallow, trying to convince myself it was just an animal. A deer, maybe, or a branch snapping in the wind. I whispered, "It's nothing," and slid out of bed to check the door. The latch was loose, so I clicked it shut. The metallic clank loud in the quiet. The tapping stopped instantly. My skin prickled, a chill curling up my spine. I stood there, staring at the door, waiting for the sound to return. It didn't. The silence was heavier now, pressing against my ears. I crawled back into bed, pulling the quilt tighter, and told myself I was overreacting. Sleep came slowly, fitful and thin. At 2 a.m., I jolted awake. Heavy footfalls thudded on the porch outside, slow and measured, pacing back and forth. My heart slammed against my ribs. I fumbled for the flashlight on the nightstand, my fingers clumsy with fear. The beam shook as I aimed it toward the window, too afraid to move the curtain. The footsteps continued, deliberate, circling the cabin. I forced myself to stand, legs trembling, and crept to the window. My breath fogged the glass as I parted the curtain, just enough to peek. The porch was empty. No one was there. But in the snow, fresh prints looped around in tight, erratic circles, as if something had been pacing for hours. I dropped the curtain, my pulse roaring. The footsteps stopped, and the silence that followed was worse. Thick, alive, like the cabin itself was holding its breath. I didn't sleep again that night. I sat on the bed, flashlight clutched to my chest, listening for any sound. The cabin felt smaller, the walls closer, the shadows sharper. When dawn finally broke, pale light seeping through the curtains, I checked the porch again. The prints were still there, undisturbed, leading nowhere, just circles in the snow. I tried to write, to focus, but my hand shook too much to hold the pen. The day passed in a haze of unease, the forest outside too quiet, the air too still. I told myself it was my imagination, that isolation was playing tricks on me. But as night fell again, dread settled in my bones. Midnight came, and with it, the whispers. They started soft, barely audible, like a breeze rustling through leaves. But they weren't coming from outside. They were inside the walls. Low, urgent voices overlapping in a frantic murmur, as if a crowd of people were pressed against the wooden planks, speaking in hushed panic. I sat up, my heart lurching. The words were indistinct, but the tone was desperate, pleading. I strained to listen, my ears aching with the effort, but I couldn't make out a single word. "Hello?" I called, my voice cracking. "Who's there?" The whisper stopped, replaced by a rasping silence that felt like it was clawing at my skin. I flicked on the flashlight, sweeping the beam across the room. The walls were bare, the cabin empty, but the air felt wrong, heavy, like I wasn't alone. I stood, my bare feet cold against the floor, and pressed my ear to the wall. Nothing. I tapped the wood, half expecting an answer. The silence mocked me. I moved to the door, checking the latch again, my hands trembling. It was still locked. I paced the small room, the whispers lingering in my mind, their urgency gnawing at me. My flashlight flickered, the beam stuttering before going out completely. I shook it, smacked it against my palm, but it stayed dark. The candle on the table was my only light now, its weak flame casting jagged shadows that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking. I sat on the bed, staring at the walls, waiting for the whispers to return. They didn't, but the silence was louder, more oppressive, like the cabin was watching me. By the third night, I was unraveling. I hadn't slept more than an hour at a time, my eyes burning, my nerves raw. I kept the candle lit, its light a frail shield against the dark. Around 1 a.m., the whispers came again, louder this time, more insistent. They seemed to come from every wall at once, surrounding me. I clutched the quilt, my breath hitching as the voices grew sharper, more distinct. Not words, but emotions, fear, anger, desperation woven into the sound. I stumbled to the wall, banging my fist against it. "Stop it!" I shouted. The voices cut off mid-breath, and the candle flame guttered, nearly extinguishing. My chest tightened. I backed away, my eyes darting to the door. I had to leave. Now I grabbed my coat and ran to the front door, yanking at the latch. It wouldn't move. The lock was open, but the door felt glued shut, an invisible force holding it in place. I threw my weight against it, my shoulder aching with the effort. "Come on!" I screamed, pounding the wood. The cabin answered with a low groan, like the beams themselves were shifting. I ran to the back door, same thing, stuck fast. The windows wouldn't budge either, their frames sealed as if welded. Panic clawed at my throat. I was trapped. I grabbed a chair, ready to smash a window, but as I raised it, the candle flickered violently, and the whispers returned, a chorus of voices now screaming inside the walls. I dropped the chair, covering my ears, but the sound burrowed into my skull. I don't know how long I sat there, curled on the floor, the voices swirling around me. Hours, maybe. The candle burned low, its light barely reaching the walls. When the first hint of dawn crept through the curtains, the whispers faded, and the door creaked open on its own. I froze, staring at the sliver of gray light. The air felt lighter, but the cabin's presence still pressed against me, like eyes boring into my back. I grabbed my bag, my notebook, anything I could carry, and bolted for the door. As I passed the bathroom, my flashlight, dead all night, flickered on. The beam hit the mirror, and for a split second I saw it, a shadowy figure looming over my reflection, its edges blurred, its form too tall, too wrong. My breath caught. I whipped around, shining the light into the empty doorway. Nothing. I looked back at the mirror, and it showed only my face, pale and hollow-eyed. My legs moved before my mind caught up, carrying me out the door and into the snow. I didn't stop running until I reached my car, the cabin shrinking in the rearview mirror as I sped down the mountain. The forest closed in behind me, swallowing the clearing. I drove for hours, the road blurring through tears I didn't realize I was shedding. I've never gone back. I can't. The cabin's still out there waiting, its walls whispering to no one. But at night, when the world is quiet, I hear them again. Those footsteps, those voices circling in my dreams. And sometimes, in the corner of my eye, I catch a shadow in the mirror, just for a heartbeat, before it's gone. Story 5. The Forsaken Cabin. The forest was a labyrinth of shadows, and I was lost in its depths. My name is Ethan, a hiker who thought he knew these trails like the back of his hand. But that late autumn evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the air grew sharp with the bite of approaching winter, I realized I'd strayed too far. My map was useless, the landmarks unfamiliar. The trees seemed to lean closer, their branches clawing at the fading light. Panic crept in, a cold weight in my chest as the realization hit. I was alone, and night was closing in fast. I pushed through the underbrush, my breath clouding in the chilly air, when I saw it, a cabin tucked away in a clearing so dense it felt like the forest was hiding it. The structure was old, its wooden walls weathered to a sickly gray, the windows cracked like broken teeth. The front door hung slightly ajar, creaking on rusted hinges as a gust of wind nudged it. It wasn't much, but it was shelter. I hesitated, my instincts screaming that something was wrong, but the alternative was a night exposed to the elements. I stepped forward, my boots crunching on the brittle leaves, and pushed the door open. The air inside was thick with mustiness, a faint undertone of decay that made my nose wrinkle. The interior was dim, lit only by the weak twilight filtering through the grimy windows. A stone hearth sat cold and dead in the corner, its ashes long settled. Dust coated every surface, rickety furniture, a sagging bookshelf, a single armchair by the door. I set my pack down and sank onto the chair, grateful to be out of the wind, but unable to shake the unease that clung to me like damp clothes. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional groan of the cabin settling. As my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I noticed a portrait on the far wall. It was a painting of a family, a man, a woman, and a young girl, all smiling with an eerie, fixed intensity. Their eyes seemed too large, too focused, as if they were watching me. I shifted uncomfortably, trying to dismiss the chill that ran down my spine. It was just a painting, I told myself, but their gazes followed me as I moved, unblinking and unyielding. I turned away, focusing on the practical. I needed light, warmth, a plan to get out of here come morning. I rummaged through my pack for my lantern and lit it, the soft glow casting flickering shadows across the room. The cabin felt smaller now, the walls pressing in. I decided to explore, hoping to find something useful. A map, a compass, anything to make sense of this place. The floorboards creaked under my weight as I moved deeper into the cabin. A narrow hallway led to a few small rooms, a cramped bedroom with a moldy mattress, a kitchen with rusted utensils, and a study, its door half open. The study was a mess of dust and cobwebs, but it held a treasure, an old leather journal on a cluttered desk. Its cover was cracked, the pages yellowed and brittle. I opened it carefully, the binding creaking like the door. The handwriting was erratic, the ink faded but legible. The first entry was dated years ago, written by someone named Marcus, who described finding the cabin just as I had, lost, desperate, stumbling upon it by chance. His words were calm at first, detailing the cabin's oddities, the cold hearth, the strange painting, the oppressive silence. But as the entries progressed, his tone shifted. He wrote of whispers in the walls, footsteps in empty rooms, shadows that moved when they shouldn't. His final entries were frantic, scrawled in a trembling hand. They're in my head. I can't tell what's real anymore. The eyes, they see everything. My heart pounded as I closed the journal. It was nonsense, I told myself. A lonely man's descent into madness. But the cabin's silence felt heavier now, like it was listening. I set the journal down and stepped back into the main room, my lantern casting long, distorted shadows. The family in the painting stared at me, their smiles sharper, almost mocking. I shook my head, trying to clear the unease. I was tired, that was all. I needed rest. I returned to the armchair by the door, wrapping myself in my jacket to ward off the chill. The lantern flickered, its light barely holding back the darkness. I closed my eyes, willing sleep to come, but the cabin wouldn't let me rest. A faint sound broke the silence, a low rhythmic tapping like fingers drumming on wood. I sat up, straining to listen. It was coming from the walls, steady and deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. I held my breath, waiting for it to stop, but it didn't. It grew louder, joined by a second sound, a soft creak, like footsteps pacing an empty floor above me. There was no upstairs. I'd explored every inch of this place. My pulse quickened, and I gripped the lantern tighter. The tapping stopped, replaced by a new sound, a whisper, low and indistinct, like voices murmuring just out of earshot. I stood, my legs unsteady, and held the lantern high, scanning the room. The shadows seemed to shift, curling at the edges of the light. The portrait's eyes gleamed, and for a moment I swore the little girl's smile twitched. "Who's there?" I called, my voice cracking. The whispers stopped, leaving a silence so thick it pressed against my eardrums. Then from the corner of the room, a shadow moved. Not a flicker of light, not a trick of the eye, a deliberate, fluid motion like something stepping out of the darkness. I stumbled back, my lantern swinging wildly, casting chaotic shadows. The figure was gone as quickly as it appeared, but the air felt heavier, charged with something I couldn't name. I backed toward the door, my eyes darting between the painting and the corners of the room. The whispers returned, louder now, overlapping in a chorus of unintelligible voices. They weren't coming from the walls anymore. They were in my head, crawling through my thoughts like insects. I pressed my hands to my ears, but it didn't help. The words were indistinct, but their tone was urgent, angry, pleading. I glanced at the painting, and my blood ran cold. The family's faces had changed. The smiles were gone, replaced by twisted expressions of rage, their eyes wide and glaring. I grabbed my pack and bolted for the door, but it wouldn't budge. The handle rattled uselessly in my hand, the wood swollen as if sealed shut. The whispers grew into a deafening roar, and the shadows in the room lunged at me, their edges sharp and claw-like. I swung the lantern, and it shattered against the wall, plunging the room into darkness. The voices screamed now, a cacophony that drowned out my own thoughts. I clawed at the door, my nails splintering against the wood until it finally gave way. I stumbled into the night, the cold air hitting me like a slap. I ran, branches tearing at my clothes, my breath ragged. The whispers followed me, fading only as I put distance between myself and the cabin. I didn't stop until the forest thinned and the first rays of dawn broke through the trees. Exhausted, I collapsed onto the ground, my body trembling. I dared to look back, expecting to see the cabin's silhouette in the distance. There was nothing, no cabin, no clearing, just an unbroken wall of trees. It was as if the place had never existed. I made it back to civilization eventually. My story sounded like madness to the rangers who found me, but I saw the doubt in their eyes when I described the cabin. They'd heard rumors of a place like that, a ghost in the forest that appeared to the lost and desperate. I don't know what it was, some trick of the mind, some echo of the past, or something worse. All I know is that I'll never go back. That cabin wasn't a refuge, it was a trap, a place where reality unraveled, and the only way out was to run. Story 6. The Pack at the Door. I'm Jack, and this is my story, my nightmare. Lucy and I thought we'd found the perfect escape. A winter retreat in our remote mountain cabin, nestled deep in the Rockies where the pines stand like silent sentinels. We'd been dreaming of this for months, a chance to unplug, to breathe crisp air, to be alone together. The forecast warned of a blizzard, but we were prepared, stocked with food, firewood, and enough supplies to outlast any storm. Or so I thought. That first night changed everything, and now, as I sit here clutching a splintered axe handle, I'm not sure I'll ever escape this place. It started as the sun dipped below the ridge, painting the sky a bruised purple. The wind howled, whipping snow into a frenzy that obscured the world beyond our windows. Lucy was stoking the fire, her dark hair catching the glow, when a scream tore through the cabin's quiet, a sound so raw, so human, it stopped my heart. It was Lucy. I bolted outside, the cold biting my skin, and found her sprawled in the snow, a massive wolf clamped onto her thigh. Its eyes burned amber, and foam dripped from its jaws, a rabid glint in its snarl. Without thinking, I grabbed the axe leaning against the porch and swung. The blade sank into its skull with a sickening crunch. The beast collapsed, blood pooling black in the snow. Lucy whimpered, clutching her leg, and I dragged her inside, my hands shaking as I slammed the door. Her wound was deep, jagged, the flesh torn like paper. I cleaned it as best I could with our first aid kit, but the blood kept coming, soaking the towels. "Jack, it hurts," she whispered, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear. I tried to stay calm, but my mind was racing. Rabies. The wolf's foaming mouth was a death sentence if we didn't get help soon. But the storm had us trapped. No signal, no roads, no way out. And then I heard it, a low, guttural growl from outside. I peered through the frosty window and saw them. 2 more wolves, their silhouettes stark against the snow, charging toward the cabin. "Lock everything!" I shouted, throwing the deadbolt. Lucy hobbled to my side, and we stood back to back by the door, hearts pounding. One of the wolves leapt onto the porch, its claws scraping the wood. I caught a glimpse through the window, a beast standing on its hind legs, nearly 5 feet tall, its eyes glowing like embers, teeth bared in what looked like a twisted, knowing grin. It stared right at me, unblinking, and my blood ran cold. It didn't lunge or claw at the door. It just watched. Then slowly it backed away, melting into the storm. I spent the next hour barricading the cabin. I nailed boards over the windows, packed snow into every crack, and dragged furniture against the door. Lucy sat by the fire, her legs swollen and feverish, her breathing shallow. "Jack, what if there are more?" she murmured. I didn't answer. I couldn't. The wolves' howls echoed outside, circling, relentless. They weren't leaving. I cleaned her wound again, but the swelling was worse, and her skin burned under my touch. I tried to focus, but the howling kept me on edge, a constant reminder of the danger just beyond the walls. The second day was worse. The storm didn't let up, and the wolves never stopped prowling. I'd catch glimpses of them through the gaps in the boards, shadows moving in the snow, eyes glinting in the dark. They didn't try to break in, but their presence was suffocating, like they were waiting for something. Lucy was fading. Her fever spiked, and she barely spoke, her eyes glassy and distant. I stayed up all night, gripping the axe, listening to the wolves' claws scrape the porch. Every creak of the cabin made me jump. I told myself we just had to hold out until the storm cleared, until help could come. But deep down, I knew help wasn't coming. By the third night, something changed. I dozed off in a chair, exhausted, when a chorus of howls snapped me awake. 3 wolves now, their voices sharp and close right outside the door. My eyes darted to Lucy, expecting her to be in bed, but she was standing next to my chair, unnaturally still, staring down at me. Her eyes were wrong, empty, like glass, no spark of life in them. She didn't move, didn't blink, just stood there, her silhouette rigid against the firelight. "Lucy?" I whispered, my voice trembling. She didn't answer. My heart thudded in my chest. I reached for her, but she didn't react. Her gaze fixed on me like she was seeing through me. I backed away, clutching the axe, and she stayed there, motionless, until dawn. When morning came, Lucy was back in bed, as if nothing had happened. She didn't remember standing over me, didn't remember anything. Her fever was worse, her leg purple and swollen, and I knew we couldn't wait any longer. I had to try the truck. It was our only chance. I bundled her in blankets, checked the windows, and grabbed the keys. The wolves had gone quiet, but I wasn't fooled. I opened the door, axe in hand, and stepped onto the porch. The air was still, the snow blinding. In the clearing I saw it, a half-eaten moose, its ribs exposed, blood staining the snow. The wolves' work. But they were nowhere in sight. I took a step, then another toward the truck, my breath clouding in the cold. That's when it hit me. A blur of reddish fur, a snarl, and pain exploded in my hand. A wolf, massive, its jaws locked around my wrist. I swung the axe, but my eyes caught the gash on its head, the bone and blood where I'd struck it days ago. It was the same wolf, the one I'd killed. Its eyes burned with that same amber glow, and it didn't flinch as I hit it again. I stumbled back, wrenching my hand free, and slammed the door shut. Blood dripped onto the floor, my hand mangled, but the horror of what I'd seen gripped me tighter than the pain. That wolf was dead. I'd buried its body in the snow myself, yet it was back, alive, hunting me. I bandaged my hand, my mind reeling. These weren't wolves. They were something else, something that didn't die, something that knew us, watched us, waited. Lucy was barely conscious now, her breathing ragged. I tried to wake her, but her eyes fluttered open, and I saw it again, that empty, glassy stare. She wasn't herself. I don't know if she ever was after that first bite. The wolves howled outside, louder now, closer. I barricaded the door again, but the cabin felt smaller, the walls closing in. Every shadow seemed to move, every creak sounded like claws. The 4th night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the fire, axe across my lap, listening. The wolves were bolder now, scratching at the walls, their weight creaking the porch. I heard a thud against the door, then another, like they were testing it. Lucy lay in bed, muttering incoherently, her skin clammy. I checked her wound, and my stomach turned. The flesh around it was black, spreading like rot, and it smelled wrong, not like infection, but something older, fouler. I backed away, my heart pounding. The wolves' howl stopped abruptly, and the silence was worse. I peered through a crack in the boards and saw them, 3 wolves standing upright in the snow, staring at the cabin, their eyes locked onto mine, and I swear they smiled. By the 5th day, I was losing it. The storm hadn't broken, and the wolves were everywhere, circling, waiting. Lucy hadn't spoken in hours, but she moved in her sleep, her limbs twitching unnaturally, like something else was pulling the strings. I didn't want to believe it, but I couldn't ignore it anymore. Whatever had bitten her, whatever these things were, they'd changed her. I caught her staring at me again that night, standing by the bed, her head tilted at an angle that made my skin crawl. "Lucy, please," I begged, but she didn't respond. Her lips curled into a faint, unnatural smile, and I saw it. Her teeth, sharper than before, glinting in the firelight. I don't know how many days it's been now. The storm never stops, and the wolves never leave. I've boarded every window, reinforced the door, but they're still out there scratching, waiting. Lucy is not Lucy anymore. She doesn't speak, doesn't eat, just watches me with those dead eyes. Last night, I woke to find her standing at the door, her hand on the deadbolt, as if she was about to open it. I screamed her name, and she turned, her face blank, her eyes glowing that same amber as the wolves. I don't know what she is now, but I know she's not my wife. I'm alone now, clutching this axe, the only thing keeping me sane. The cabin's walls creak under the wolves' weight, their claws scraping closer each night. I hear them whispering, not words, but something worse. A sound that crawls into my head and stays there. The truck's useless, the snow too deep, and I can't fight them forever. They're not just wolves. They're something ancient, something that doesn't die, something that wants us. I don't know if I'll make it through another night, but I know one thing. This cabin isn't a shelter anymore. It's a trap, and I'm not sure I'll ever get out. Story 7. The Dreamcatcher's Call. The tires of our old SUV crunched over the gravel as Faye and I wound our way up the narrow road into the Colorado Rockies. It was early spring, the air crisp with the promise of a quiet weekend at her family's cabin, a weathered wooden retreat tucked deep in the pines. The mountains loomed around us, their peaks dusted with snow, and the silence of the wilderness felt like a living thing pressing against the windows. We'd been planning this getaway for weeks, a chance to escape the grind, to breathe, to just be. But as we climbed higher, a strange unease settled in my chest, like the mountains were watching us. We arrived at the cabin just before dusk on Thursday. It was small, sturdy, with a steep roof and a stone chimney, surrounded by dense forest. The air smelled of pine and something sharper, almost metallic. Faye, always the optimist, bounded out of the car, her dark braids swinging as she hauled our bags inside. I followed, scanning the tree line. The woods were too quiet, no birds, no rustle of small animals, just the wind, low and mournful, threading through the branches. That first evening, we hiked a short trail behind the cabin, our boots sinking into the softening earth. The forest felt alive in a way I couldn't explain, like it was holding its breath. As we returned, the sky darkened and fat snowflakes began to fall. By the time we reached the cabin, the snow was coming down hard, a sudden blizzard that turned the world white. Faye checked her phone. No signal. The radio crackled with static, but we caught fragments of a weather report. The mountain road was closed. We were snowed in. That night, as we settled by the fire, we noticed it. A massive Dreamcatcher hanging from a hook outside the back door. It was enormous, nearly 3 feet across, made of gnarled twigs and rough twine, with strange, uneven knots that didn't look like any store-bought design. Its presence was unsettling, like it didn't belong. Faye shivered, her eyes fixed on it through the window. "Who would leave that here?" she whispered. I shrugged, trying to play it off, but the thing gave me the creeps too. We left it untouched, locked the door, and went to bed. Around midnight, I woke to a sound, crunching footsteps in the snow, slow and deliberate, circling the cabin. My heart thudded as I grabbed the flashlight from the nightstand and crept to the window. The beam cut through the dark, revealing nothing but snow and trees. The footsteps stopped. I stood there, breath fogging the glass, waiting for something to move. Nothing did. Faye stirred, mumbling in her sleep, and I crawled back into bed, telling myself it was just an animal. Friday morning, the blizzard hadn't let up. Snow piled against the windows, and the world outside was a blur of white. We stayed inside playing cards, boiling water for tea, trying to ignore the oppressive silence. The Dreamcatcher still hung outside, swaying slightly in the wind. I avoided looking at it. That night, the cabin felt colder, the air heavier. I woke to Faye shaking my shoulder, her eyes wide in the dark. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. I strained to listen. At first, there was nothing but the creak of the cabin settling. Then, faint and far off, I heard it. A man's voice, low and pleading, calling out in a language I didn't recognize. It sounded desperate, like someone lost in the storm. But the words were strange, guttural, slipping between sounds I couldn't place. My skin prickled. "It's just the wind," I said, but my voice shook. Faye didn't answer, just pulled the blanket tighter around her. We lay there listening until the voice faded and the silence returned. By Saturday, the storm was relentless. The cabin felt smaller, the walls closing in. Faye was quieter than usual, her usual spark dimmed. She told me she'd dreamed of being lost in the forest, running from something she couldn't see but could feel. Something close, watching her. When she woke, she'd been sobbing. I held her, trying to shake the unease that clung to me like damp cloth. We busied ourselves with chores, chopping extra wood, checking the food supplies. But the Dreamcatcher loomed in my mind, its shadow stretching across the snow. That night, around 1 a.m., Faye woke me again, her voice barely a whisper. "It's him," she said, her eyes glistening with tears. "It's Grandpa." My stomach dropped. Her grandfather had died years ago, long before we met. I listened, and there it was, a man's voice, older now, rough with age, calling her name from the darkness. "Faye! Faye!" It pleaded, faint but clear, like it was just beyond the door. I told her it couldn't be real, that it was just a dream bleeding into the night, but my heart was pounding. The voice didn't stop. It called again, softer, more insistent, pulling at something deep inside me. Faye clutched my arm, trembling. "He's out there," she whispered. I didn't know what to say. I'd never heard her grandfather's voice, but the way she looked at me, I knew she believed it was him. We didn't sleep after that. We sat up, wrapped in blankets, the fire casting flickering shadows on the walls. The voice stopped eventually, but the silence was worse, like it was waiting for us to make a move. I kept thinking about the Dreamcatcher, its twisted twigs and uneven knots. It felt like a warning or maybe a trap. Sunday night was when it got personal. I was half asleep, the fire reduced to embers, when a new sound jolted me awake. A woman's voice, soft and coaxing, calling my name from the snow. My blood turned to ice. I crept to the bathroom window, the only one not boarded against the storm, and cracked it open. The freezing air hit me like a slap, but I leaned closer, listening. There it was again, my mother's voice, clear as day, pleading for me to come outside. "Please, I need you." My mother was in California, safe in her suburban home, not out here in a blizzard. It was impossible. Yet the voice was hers. Her cadence, her warmth, her quiet urgency. My hand hovered over the window latch, my body urging me to answer, to step outside and find her. But something snapped me back, a primal instinct screaming that this was wrong. I slammed the window shut, my hands shaking, and sank to the floor. Faye was awake now, watching me from the doorway. "You heard it too, didn't you?" she said. I nodded, unable to speak. We both knew now. The voices weren't random. They were tailored, personal, designed to pull us out into the storm. I thought of the Dreamcatcher, its eerie presence, and wondered if it was connected. Was it marking us, drawing something to us? The stories I'd heard about these mountains, tales of things that hunted in the snow, mimicking voices to lure people into the dark, suddenly didn't seem so far-fetched. Monday came, and the storm showed no sign of stopping. Our food was holding, but our nerves were fraying. The cabin felt like a cage, the Dreamcatcher a constant reminder of something we couldn't understand. We agreed on one thing. We wouldn't answer the voices, no matter who they sounded like. That latex use package, colors to document class, articles stab begin document matter, how real they seemed. We stayed inside, jumping at every creak, every gust of wind. The voices came again that night. First Faye's grandfather, then my mother, then others, overlapping, calling our names in a chorus of desperation. I clamped my hands over my ears, refusing to listen. The sound burrowed into my skull, relentless. Tuesday morning, the snow slowed, and by midday we heard the crunch of boots outside, not the eerie circling of before, but purposeful steps. A ranger, bundled in gear, knocked on the door. The road was still blocked, but he'd hiked up to check on stranded cabins. His face was weathered, his eyes sharp, and he didn't ask about the Dreamcatcher. When we mentioned it, he just nodded, like he'd heard stranger things in these mountains. We didn't tell him about the voices. It felt too raw, too unbelievable. As we packed to leave, I noticed the Dreamcatcher was gone. The hook was empty, the snow around it undisturbed. Maybe the wind took it, or maybe something else did. We didn't wait to find out. We followed the ranger down the mountain, our boots sinking into the snow, the forest silent around us. The air felt lighter as we descended, but the weight of what we'd experienced stayed with us. Faye and I didn't talk much on the drive home. The voices, the Dreamcatcher, the suffocating fear, they were real, but we had no proof, no answers. We never went back to the cabin. The mountains kept their secrets, and we left them there, buried in the snow. Story 8, The Bloodstained Cabin. My name is Ethan, and I'm not sure I'll ever sleep soundly again. What happened to us that night in the South Carolina woods clings to me like damp rot, seeping into every quiet moment. It was supposed to be a simple trip, a weekend escape from college midterms, just me and 4 friends, Jake, Mia, Lucas, and Sarah, hiking through the dense forest near a friend's family farm. We were young, restless, chasing the thrill of adventure under a swollen harvest moon. But what we found out there wasn't adventure. It was something else, something that makes my hands shake even now as I write this. It started innocently enough. The air was crisp, the kind of autumn night where your breath hangs in front of you. We'd been hiking for hours, our flashlights cutting through the dark, when Jake spotted it first, a faint outline through the trees. A cabin, old and wooden, crouched in a clearing like it had grown out of the earth itself. Its mid-century design was oddly out of place, all sharp angles and sagging eaves like something from a forgotten postcard. The windows were dark, some cracked, and the front door hung slightly ajar, swaying in the faint breeze. We should have turned back right then. Something about it felt wrong, like the air around it was too still, too heavy. But curiosity is a cruel thing, and we were fools. Mia pushed the door open, her flashlight beam slicing through the gloom inside. The smell hit us first, musty, metallic, like old pennies left in the rain. The floorboards creaked under our weight as we stepped inside, and my stomach twisted. The walls were a mess of scrawled markings, strange, looping symbols that looked like they were scratched in a hurry, mixed with jagged English words spray-painted in red. Stay, watch, bleed. My heart thudded. Lucas, always the skeptic, laughed it off, saying it was probably just vandals, but his voice cracked at the edges. Sarah's flashlight lingered on the floor where dark stains spread like spilled ink, still glistening in the light. Fresh, too fresh. I wanted to say something to tell everyone to leave, but my throat felt sealed shut. Then we saw the chains. Rusted manacles hung from hooks on the far wall, heavy padlocks dangling like dead weights. They weren't decorative. They were used. Scratches marred the wood around them, deep and frantic, like someone had clawed at the walls. Mia whispered, "What the hell is this place?" None of us answered. We were all staring at the stains, the chains, the words. The air felt thicker now, like it was pressing against my skin, urging me to move, but rooting me in place. Jake, always the bold one, pointed to a narrow staircase in the corner. "There's got to be more upstairs," he said, his voice too loud in the quiet. Against every instinct screaming in my head, we followed him. The stairs groaned under our weight, each step echoing like a warning. The attic was worse. A single circular window let in a sliver of moonlight, illuminating more symbols carved into the walls, some so deep they looked like wounds in the wood. An old bed frame sat in the corner, its mattress long gone, replaced by more of those dark stains pooling on the floorboards. I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone, that something was watching us from the shadows just beyond our flashlight beams. That's when we heard it. Footsteps. Heavy, rapid, like someone in heels clacking across the floor below. My blood froze. We spun around, flashlights darting wildly, but the attic was empty, except for us. "Who's there?" Lucas called, his voice shaking now. No answer, just the echo of those footsteps, faster now, circling below. Sarah grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "We need to go," she whispered. We didn't argue. We stumbled down the stairs, our footsteps drowning out the phantom ones, and burst out the front door into the night. The air outside felt colder, sharper, but I was just glad to be out of that suffocating cabin. We didn't stop to talk. We just started walking, desperate to put distance between us and that place. Jake pulled out his compass, its needle glinting under the moonlight. "The farm's this way," he said, pointing east. We followed, weaving through the trees, the crunch of leaves under our boots, the only sound. But something was wrong. After 20 minutes, the trees parted, and there it was, the cabin. Same sagging eaves, same cracked windows, same open door. My stomach dropped. "That's impossible," Mia said, her voice barely above a whisper. We'd walked straight, following the compass. There was no way we'd looped back. Lucas swore and checked the compass again, but the needle spun lazily, refusing to settle. We tried again, taking a different path, moving faster this time, our breaths ragged. The forest seemed to close in around us, the trees leaning closer, their branches like skeletal fingers brushing against our jackets. Half an hour later, we stopped dead. The cabin loomed ahead, its dark silhouette mocking us. "This isn't right," Sarah said, her voice breaking. "We're not that lost." Jake tried another direction, then another, each time more frantic. Every path, every turn, every desperate sprint through the woods ended the same way, back at the cabin's doorstep. It was like the forest was bending around us, trapping us in some invisible loop. My chest tightened, panic clawing at me. The air felt alive now, humming with something I couldn't name. Then Mia screamed. She was staring at the cabin's upper window, the circular one in the attic. A figure stood there, tall and hunched, its silhouette stark against the faint moonlight. Its face was a void, just darkness, except for two large, gleaming eyes, black as oil, staring down at us. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The figure didn't move either, but I felt its gaze, heavy and cold, like it was peeling me apart. Lucas shouted something I couldn't hear over the blood pounding in my ears, and we ran. We crashed through the underbrush, branches snapping against our faces, not caring about direction anymore, just running. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but we didn't stop until we hit a rusted wire fence. We scrambled over it, tearing our clothes, and collapsed on the other side, gasping. When I looked back, the cabin was gone, swallowed by the trees. Dawn was breaking, gray light filtering through the branches, and we realized we were 3 miles from the trail, nowhere near where we'd started. Exhausted, we made our way back to the farm, silent except for the occasional shuddering breath. No one wanted to talk about it, but we all felt it. That place had marked us. Later that day, Lucas insisted we go back just to prove it was real, that we hadn't imagined it. We found the clearing at noon, but the cabin was gone. Not just gone, ruined. A pile of splintered wood and crumbled stone sat where it had been, like it had collapsed decades ago. No chains, no symbols, no stains, just decay. But I swear I could still feel those eyes watching me, even in the daylight. We never spoke of it again, not really. Jake moved away. Mia started sleeping with the lights on. Sarah won't go near the woods anymore. Lucas pretends it was just a bad night, but I see the way his hands shake when it gets dark. As for me, I can't close my eyes without seeing that figure, those eyes, that cabin. I don't know what it was, but it wasn't just a place. It was alive in some awful way, and it wanted us there. I don't sleep much anymore. The dark feels too much like that night, and I'm afraid if I close my eyes too long, I'll open them to find myself standing at that cabin's door again. Story 9, Tailypo's Reckoning. My name is Jacob Porter, a trapper born and bred in the shadow of Jawbone Ridge, where the Appalachian peaks claw at the sky. The year was 1873, and I'd staked my life on self-reliance, trusting my hands, my rifle, and my 3 dogs, Jesse, Ruby, and Cole, to see me through the brutal winters. The ridge carried its own warnings, whispered by old hunters around flickering hearths. Tales of the Tailypo, a cat-like beast with a vengeful streak for those who dared take what was its own. I'd always dismissed such stories as mountain superstition, the kind of yarn spun to scare greenhorns. But that October, stranded in a crumbling cabin with hunger gnawing at my bones, I learned some truths are carved in blood. The cabin sat deep in a pine-choked hollow, its timbers weathered gray and sagging under decades of frost. I'd arrived late in the season, the air sharp with the promise of snow, planning to hunt and preserve enough game to last until spring. My dogs, loyal as ever, took to the place uneasily. Jesse, the grizzled hound, paced the threshold of the loft, his hackles raised, refusing to climb the ladder. Ruby, smaller and keener, whined by the hearth, her eyes darting to the windows. Cole, the youngest, growled at shadows, his ears twitching at sounds I couldn't hear. I chalked it up to the strangeness of new territory, nothing a good fire and a full belly wouldn't fix. The first night, just past midnight, a sound tore me from sleep. It was no wolf's cry, no owl's hoot, a low rolling howl that seemed to rise from the earth itself, curling through the ridges like smoke. The wind outside clawed at the cabin, rattling shutters and plucking at the pines like skeletal fingers. I lit a lantern, its weak glow barely cutting the dark, and strapped on snowshoes. My dogs stayed behind, huddled by the hearth, their eyes wide and unblinking. The howl came again, closer now, from the heart of the woods. Under a sky black as pitch, the forest stretched endless, the moonlight silvering the frost. My spine prickled, not from cold but from a primal dread I couldn't shake. I turned back, telling myself it was just the wind playing tricks. By morning, the unease lingered. I busied myself with chores, brushing snow and sticks from the porch roof, nailing down planks loosened by the storm. The game was scarce. Deer tracks vanished into the underbrush, and rabbits seemed to have burrowed deep. My stores were dwindling, and hunger sharpened my thoughts to a fine edge. That afternoon, checking my traps, I found something strange, a creature, or what was left of it, caught in a snare. It was no fox or bobcat, but something leaner, with sleek black fur and a long whip-like tail that dangled limp. Starvation dulled my caution. I skinned it, took the tail, and left the rest for the crows. Back at the cabin, I roasted the tail over the fire, its rich, musky scent filling the air. The first bite was tough, all salt and sinew, but hunger made it bearable. I washed it down with spring water and fed scraps to the dogs, who sniffed warily but ate. Night fell, and with it came the howl again, louder, sharper, closer. It wasn't distant now, it was circling the cabin, a guttural wail that set my teeth on edge. The dogs erupted into frantic barking, darting under the bed, their tails tucked. Something heavy thudded against the door once, twice, shaking the frame. I grabbed my rifle, heart pounding, and peered through the window. Nothing but darkness and the glint of snow. The howling didn't stop until dawn. When I ventured out, the porch was a mess. Saplings nearby snapped like kindling, and a few long, coarse black hairs clung to the railing, glinting in the weak sunlight. My stomach twisted. The old hunters' tales weren't just stories, they were warnings, etched in the language of the wild. I'd taken something I shouldn't have, and something wanted it back. The next night, the wind carried a new edge, swirling snow into ghostly shapes. I barred the door and kept the fire high, my rifle across my lap. The dogs huddled close, their warmth a small comfort. Just after midnight, the howling returned, so loud it seemed to come from inside the walls. The windows rattled as if clawed by unseen hands. I shouted into the dark, my voice swallowed by the storm, demanding whatever it was to show itself. A mistake. The air grew thick, oppressive, like the moment before lightning strikes. Two glowing eyes appeared at the window, yellow, unblinking, burning through the frost. I fired, the shot deafening in the small cabin. The eyes vanished, but the howling only grew wilder, a frenzy of rage that echoed in my skull. Daylight brought no relief. The snow around the cabin was trampled, marked with deep, clawed prints that circled the porch. More black hairs were tangled in the splintered door frame. I tried to hunt, to distract myself, but the forest felt alive, watching. Every snap of a twig sent my pulse racing. Ruby refused to leave the cabin, her whimpers constant. Jesse growled at the air, his fur bristling. Cole, usually bold, stayed at my heels, his eyes darting to the tree line. That evening, I fortified the cabin, nailing boards over the windows, piling logs against the door. It wasn't enough. The third night, the storm turned savage, wind screaming through the pines. The howling started early, closer than ever, a chorus of fury that drowned out the fire's crackle. The dogs went mad, barking and clawing at the floor. Something slammed into the door, splintering wood. I fired through the gap, blind, each shot answered by a scream that wasn't animal or human, but something worse. The air grew heavy, the lantern flickering as if starved of oxygen. Then silence, sharp, unnatural, like the world holding its breath. I opened the door, rifle shaking in my hands. The snow glowed under a star-smeared sky. At the tree line, those eyes blazed again, brighter, closer. The creature lunged, a blur of black fur, lithe and sinuous, its scorpion-like tail whipping through the air. I fired point blank, the recoil jarring my shoulder. Its scream tore through me, a sound of raw agony and hate. It crashed into the porch, talons raking the wood, jaws snapping inches from my throat. I swung the rifle like a club, felt it connect, and stumbled back. The world spun, snow, fur, blood, and those burning eyes. I woke at sunrise, sprawled on the porch, my jaw throbbing like it'd been kicked by a mule. The door hung off its hinges, claw marks gouged deep into the frame. Ruby lay beside me, her flank bloodied but breathing. Jesse and Cole were inside, trembling but alive. The snow was stained dark red, pooling beneath the porch. The Tailypo was gone, but it left something behind. The tip of its tail, severed and wedged between the bedposts, black and glistening like a warning. For weeks I stayed in that cabin, too stubborn to flee. The howling never returned, but the forest never felt the same. Every hunt, every step into the woods carried a weight. The dogs bolted at the faintest whiff of anything feline, their trust in the wild broken. I burned the tail tip in the fire, hoping to end whatever curse I'd stirred. The smoke was acrid, curling like a living thing. Old hunters had been right. On Jawbone Ridge, some legends were flesh and blood, and some debts were paid in fear. I left the ridge come spring, but the memory of those eyes follows me still. Every creak of a floorboard, every rustle in the dark brings it back. I don't tell this story to scare folks. I tell it because the wild doesn't forgive, and some things once taken demand a reckoning. Story 10, Still Waiting in the Dark. My name is Marisol Carter, and I'm a writer chasing ghosts of the past. Not the kind that rattle chains, but the kind that live in whispered stories and half-forgotten truths. That's what brought me to Morning Star Cabin, a place the townsfolk at the edge of Baxter Forest spoke of in hushed tones. Cursed since the fire, they'd say, their eyes darting to the dense pines that hid the cabin from the world. The story was always the same. A family lived there once, a father, a mother, and their young daughter, Margaret. A fire tore through the cabin years ago. Only the father made it out. The mother and daughter were never seen again, and the cabin had stood abandoned ever since, a blackened husk swallowed by the forest. I'd heard the tales my whole life, growing up in a nearby town. As a historian of local lore, I made it my job to dig into these stories, to find the truth beneath the rumors. Morningstar Cabin was my latest obsession. I'd spent months tracking down old newspaper clippings and faded records, piecing together fragments of the tragedy. The fire was no accident, some said. Arson, maybe, or something darker. The father's survival was a mystery. He'd been found wandering the forest, incoherent, with burns on his hands and face. No one could explain why he lived when his family didn't. The official reports were vague. The case closed too quickly. That's why I was here, driving my battered pickup up the winding dirt road as twilight bled into the sky. The forest loomed around me, pines so tall they seemed to lean inward, blotting out the last of the light. My truck's headlights caught the cabin as I rounded the final bend. A sagging, charred skeleton of a house, its windows like empty eyes. The air was heavy, the kind of quiet that presses against your eardrums. No birds, no wind, just silence. I parked and grabbed my lantern, notebook, and a small recorder. My boots crunched on the gravel as I approached, my auburn hair curling in the damp evening air. My gray-green eyes scanned the porch, noting the splintered steps and the way the door hung crooked on its hinges. I wasn't afraid, not yet. I'd faced worse than an old house, a divorce that left me hollow, a career that never quite took off. This was just another challenge, another story to uncover. The door creaked as I pushed it open, and the air inside hit me like a slap. Icy, stale, thick with the smell of ash and decay. My lantern cast a weak glow, illuminating dust motes that floated like tiny ghosts. The main room was a ruin. Scorched beams, a collapsed table, and a fireplace choked with soot. On the mantel, I found a framed photograph, half burned. It showed a family, a man, a woman, and a little girl with pigtails, all smiling. The father's face was scorched away, leaving only a blackened smear. I reached out, my fingers brushing the frame, and a chill ran through me. I turned the photo over and found a handwritten date on the back, July 12th, 1998, the night of the fire. I set up my recorder and spoke softly, my voice steady despite the unease creeping up my spine. Marisol Carter, Morningstar Cabin, July 2nd, 2025. Initial observations. The structure is intact, but heavily damaged. Found a photograph, dated the night of the fire. No immediate signs of... I stopped. A faint sound, like a whisper, came from the corner of the room. I swung the lantern around, but there was nothing. Just a pile of ashes and splintered wood. My heart thudded, but I chalked it up to the wind. Except there was no wind. The forest outside was still. I moved deeper into the cabin, my boots scuffing against the floor. The kitchen was a wreck. Shattered dishes, a rusted stove, and a single chair tipped over like someone had left in a hurry. I found a staircase leading up, its banister charred but intact. The attic was my next stop. The stairs groaned under my weight, each step louder than the last. At the top, I found a small room, barely big enough to stand in. The air was heavier here, oppressive, like it was holding its breath. In the corner, half buried in dust, was a broken doll. Its porcelain face was cracked, one eye missing, and it clutched a singed scrap of fabric, a child's dress maybe. I knelt, my fingers hovering over it, when the recorder in my pocket crackled, static at first, then something else, soft, childlike giggles. My breath caught. I checked the device. The battery was dead. I hadn't touched it since starting the recording downstairs. I stood, my lantern trembling in my hand. The giggles came again, faint but unmistakable, from somewhere below. I forced myself to move, descending the stairs, my eyes darting to every shadow. Back in the main room, I noticed something I'd missed before, a cracked mirror above the fireplace. I stepped closer, my reflection warped in the glass. For a moment, I thought I saw something behind me. Two shapes, one tall, one small, flickering at the edge of the frame. I spun around, heart pounding, but the room was empty. Just me, the dust, and that suffocating silence. The air grew colder, heavier. I could feel it now, a presence like the cabin was watching me. I whispered to myself, "Focus, Marisol. It's just an old house." But the words felt hollow. I set the lantern down and started photographing the room, documenting every detail. The scorched walls, the broken furniture, the eerie stillness. As I moved, I heard it again, a soft sob, barely audible, coming from nowhere and everywhere. My skin prickled. I turned slowly, scanning the room, and that's when I saw it. A shadow in the corner, small and hunched, like a child curled up in fear. I froze, my voice barely a whisper. "Hello?" No answer, just that sob, louder now, cutting through the silence like a knife. I took a step closer, and the shadow shifted, vanishing into the wall. My pulse raced, but something in me, curiosity maybe, or stubbornness, pushed me forward. I wasn't here to run. I was here for answers. I spread my notebook on the floor, flipping to the pages where I jotted down the family's names. The father, James, the mother, Eliza, the daughter, Margaret Maggie. I spoke her name, soft but clear. Margaret, little Maggie. The air shifted, a faint hum vibrating through the room. The fireplace flickered, though no wood lay in its grate. A faint glow spread, and there she was, a girl no older than 8, her dress tattered and singed, her eyes wide and sorrowful. She didn't speak, just pointed to a bookcase against the wall. My hand shook as I approached it. The bookcase was heavy, its shelves warped and empty. I pushed, muscles straining, until it slid aside, revealing a hidden hatch in the floor. My breath hitched. Every instinct screamed to leave, to run, but Maggie's specter watched me, her eyes pleading. I knelt, prying the hatch open. A wave of smoke and soot billowed up, choking me. I coughed, waving it away, and peered into the darkness below. A rickety ladder led to a cellar. I descended, the lantern casting jagged shadows on the walls. The cellar was small, damp, and reeked of ash. In the corner sat a wooden box, its edges worn but glowing faintly like it held its own light. I approached, my heart pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. The box was unlocked, its lid creaking as I lifted it. Inside were letters, their paper yellowed and brittle, and a small silver locket. I opened one of the letters, my eyes scanning the faded ink. It was Liza's handwriting, her words frantic but full of love. "James, my heart, keep Maggie safe," one read. Another dated the day of the fire. "If I don't make it, you will save our Margaret." I unclasped the locket. A soft golden light spilled out, warm against the cellar's chill. I felt it, a tenderness, a connection, like the love in those letters was alive. I climbed back upstairs, the locket clutched in my hand. Maggie's specter was gone, but the air felt different, lighter. I crossed to the bedroom where a sagging bed stood in the corner. The air shimmered, and I saw him, James, or what was left of him. A faint outline of a man, his face scarred and sorrowful. His hand reached out, trembling. I placed the locket in his palm, and the air hummed again, a low, gentle sound like an exhale. The cabin seemed to sigh. The oppressive weight lifted, replaced by a quiet warmth. Maggie's form flickered beside her father, her small hand in his. Their eyes met mine, not with fear or anger, but with something like gratitude. The light from the locket grew, enveloping them, and then they were gone. The fireplace dimmed, the air stilled. The cabin felt empty, not menacing anymore, just old and tired. I stepped outside as the first rays of dawn broke through the pines. A neighbor, an old man I'd seen in town, was trudging up the path. He stopped, looking at the cabin, then at me. "I guess they can rest now," he said, his voice rough but kind. I nodded, unable to speak. The forest was waking up, birds calling softly, the silence finally broken. I drove away, the locket and letters in my bag, their weight a reminder of what I'd found. Not just a story, but a truth, one of love, loss, and a family finally at peace. Story 11, The Howling Within. I'm Daniel Hale, and I thought I knew what solitude meant. After years with the Park Service, I'd seen my share of empty trails and quiet nights under the stars. But nothing prepared me for the cabin in the Rockies, a weathered Forest Service outpost I'd claimed as my refuge from a city that chewed up my soul. I needed the silence, the space to forget the things I'd left behind, things I won't speak of, not even here. The cabin was perfect, remote, perched high on a ridge, surrounded by pines that whispered secrets in the wind. I was ready to live simply, chop wood, boil water, write in my journal by the fire's glow. That was the plan anyway. The first week was everything I'd hoped for. Mornings smelled of damp earth and resin, the air sharp enough to cut through the haze in my mind. I'd wake before dawn, my dog Bear snoring at my feet, and watch the sky blush pink over the peaks. The days fell into a rhythm, haul water from the creek, split logs, scribble thoughts in my journal. It was peaceful, too peaceful maybe. By the 8th night, something shifted. I woke to a sound, a low guttural groan that seemed to rise from the forest itself. The wind had died, leaving the night unnaturally still. My breath caught as I lay in the dark, straining to hear it again. Bear's ears twitched, but he didn't move. I fumbled for a candle, its weak flame throwing jagged shadows across the cabin walls. They danced like twisted figures mocking me. Then came the knock, slow, deliberate. 3 heavy thuds against the door. My heart slammed against my ribs. Nobody could be out here. The nearest road was miles away, and winter was closing in. I gripped the edge of my cot, willing myself to stay still. The knock came again, softer this time, almost pleading. Bear growled low, his hackles up, but I couldn't move. I just sat there, staring at the door until the silence returned. Morning came, gray and heavy with the promise of snow. I checked the door. Nothing. No tracks, no marks, just the same scuffed porch I'd swept the day before. I told myself it was the wind, a branch, anything but what my gut screamed. Bear seemed uneasy, sniffing the air with a low whine. I tried to shake it off, busying myself with chores, but the forest felt different now. Watched. That night I heard footsteps, crunching, uneven, like something heavy dragging through the snow. I grabbed my rifle and peered through the window, but the darkness swallowed everything beyond the glass. Bear paced, his nails clicking on the floorboards. The footsteps stopped, then started again, closer. I held my breath, finger on the trigger, but nothing appeared. Just the endless black of the night. I didn't sleep. By the 10th day, the sounds were constant. Footsteps circled the cabin at dusk, never close enough to see. Sometimes a faint laugh carried on the wind, sharp, like a blade across my nerves. I started checking the windows obsessively, bolting the door even during the day. Bear stopped eating, his eyes darting to every creak of the cabin. I tried to write in my journal, but my hand shook too much. The words came out wrong, jagged, like someone else was guiding the pen. I wrote about the old stories I'd heard as a kid. Tales of the Wendigo, a creature born from hunger and madness in the wild. I laughed at myself for even thinking it. Superstition, nothing more. But the laughter felt hollow. On the 12th night, I saw it. A snowstorm had rolled in, blanketing the world in white fury. I was stoking the fire when I caught movement outside the window, a tall, gaunt shape at the edge of the tree line. It stood motionless, its outline blurred by the snow. I grabbed my rifle, heart pounding, and aimed. The figure didn't move. I shouted, my voice swallowed by the storm, and fired. The shot echoed, but when I blinked, the figure was gone. No tracks, no sign, just the snow, falling harder now. I stopped sleeping after that. My eyes burned, my thoughts frayed like old rope. The cabin, once a sanctuary, felt like a trap. Every sound was a threat, the creak of the floor, the snap of a branch, the wind's low moan. Bear wouldn't leave my side, his tail tucked, his whimpers mirroring my own dread. I started seeing things in the corners of my vision, flashes of movement, shadows that didn't match the firelight. My journal became a mess of frantic scribbles. It's out there, it's watching, it knows my name. One morning, I opened the journal and froze. The page was damp, the ink smeared. Beneath my last entry, in my own handwriting, were 3 words: I am here. I dropped the book, my pulse roaring in my ears. I hadn't written that. I couldn't have. I tore through the cabin, checking every corner, every window. Nothing. Bear whined, pressing against my leg. I grabbed the lantern and stumbled outside, the cold biting my skin. The forest was silent, the snow untouched except for my own tracks. But I felt it. Eyes on me, heavy and unblinking. That night, Bear woke me with a snarl. He was staring at the door, his body rigid. I grabbed the rifle, my hand slick with sweat. The knock came again, slow, deliberate, like it was taunting me. I shouted, demanding who was there, but only silence answered. Then, from the clearing beyond the cabin, a howl. Not a wolf, not an animal. Something else. Something that twisted my stomach into knots. Bear lunged at the door, barking wildly, then stopped, cowering with a yelp. I flung the door open, rifle raised, but the clearing was empty. Just snow and shadows. The days blurred together. I stopped eating, my body weak, but my mind racing. The footsteps grew bolder, circling closer each night. The laughter was louder now, weaving through the trees like a chorus of ghosts. I saw the figure again and again, always at the tree line, always gone when I looked too long. My dreams were worse. I was running through a white desert, chasing something that howled in my own voice. I woke screaming, my throat raw, Bear trembling beside me. By the 3rd week, I was unraveling. I couldn't trust my own eyes. The mirror showed a stranger, hollow cheeks, wild eyes, a face I didn't recognize. I wrote in my journal, We all have a limit. The stories say fear can break you, turn you into something else. I stopped staring at the page. The ink was fresh, but I didn't remember writing half of it. The words twisted, accusing me. You brought me here. I couldn't stay inside anymore. The cabin felt alive, its walls closing in. I grabbed the lantern and stumbled into the night, bare at my heels. The snow was falling hard, the wind screaming through the pines. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to move. The footsteps followed, crunching just behind me. I spun, swinging the lantern, but saw nothing. The laughter came again, closer, mocking. I ran, my boots sinking into the snow, my breath ragged. Bear howled, darting ahead, then stopped dead, staring into the dark. I followed his gaze and saw them, glowing eyes, low to the ground, moving fast. I fired, the shot swallowed by the storm. The eyes vanished. I collapsed at the edge of a clearing, my body shaking, my mind screaming. The laughter was everywhere now, inside my head, in the wind, in the crunch of snow. I covered my ears, begging it to stop. I don't know how long I lay there sobbing, the cold seeping into my bones. But then as suddenly as it began, the storm cleared, the wind died, the laughter faded. The forest was silent, the air still. I stood, my legs weak, and looked around. The clearing was empty, the snow pristine. Bear pressed against me, his warmth grounding me. I stumbled back to the cabin, the lantern flickering. The yellow light in the window glowed like a beacon, guiding me home. I stood on the porch, the vast wilderness stretching out before me, and felt something shift inside. The fear was still there, but it was quieter now, like a beast retreating into the dark. I packed my things that morning, my hand steady for the first time in weeks. The forest was calm, the air crisp and clean. I took one last look at the cabin, its weathered walls holding secrets I'd never understand, and turned away. I don't know what was out there. Maybe nothing, maybe everything. The worst of it wasn't the footsteps or the laughter or the eyes in the dark. It was what I found in myself, staring back from that mirror, from those pages. I left the cabin behind, but I carried the truth with me. The real monster was always inside. Story 12, The Shadows of Ape Canyon. I'm Samir, and I've always been the one to lead, to keep things steady. My beard's thick from years in the wild, my hands calloused from gripping rifles and ropes. The forests of Washington are my second home, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened in Ape Canyon last July. The four of us, me, Lena, Marco, and Jade, thought we knew what we were getting into. We were wrong. It started with a plan to hunt elk. The four of us had done this before, threading through dense woods, tracking game under starlight. Lena, a bioengineer with a mind like a steel trap, was on summer break, her sharp eyes catching details the rest of us missed. Marco, built like a bear and just as comfortable in the wild, could handle a rifle better than anyone I knew. Jade, quiet but unflinching, had this way of staying calm, her flashlight always sweeping the dark like she was waiting for something to step into the light. We were a solid crew, or so I thought, when we set out for Ape Canyon. The name carried weight. Back in 1924, prospectors swore 7-foot ape men pelted their cabin with rocks after one of their own was shot. A legend, sure, but the kind that sticks in your head when the forest goes quiet. We laughed about it as we hiked, our boots crunching on pine needles, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth. The cabin we found at dusk was old, its logs slick with moss, perched on rock pilings like it was trying to escape the ground. It looked abandoned, but sturdy enough. We set up camp nearby, our cots arranged around a crackling campfire. The plan was simple: rest tonight, hunt at dawn. As the sun dipped below the ridge, we noticed tracks in the clearing, deer prints, fresh and crisscrossing, but then something else. Huge, human-like footprints with toes too long, too wide. Lena crouched, studying them, her brow furrowed. "These aren't right," she said, her voice low. Marco grinned, his teeth glinting in the firelight. "Bigfoot's out there, sizing us up." We laughed, but it was forced, the kind of laugh you use to push away the unease. Jade's flashlight beam danced across the trees, lingering on the shadows. Night fell, and the forest turned oppressive, the air thick with silence. We secured the dogs, 2 hounds we'd brought for tracking, and settled into the cabin. The musty smell clung to everything, the floorboards creaking under our weight. I kept my rifle close, one ear always listening. Lena busied herself organizing gear while Marco cleaned his gun, humming softly. Jade sat by the window, her flashlight now off, but her eyes fixed on the dark outside. "It's too quiet," she whispered. I nodded, brushing it off. "Just the woods," I said, but my gut twisted. Around midnight, a thud shook the cabin's frame. Not loud, but deep, like something heavy had brushed against the walls. I stood, gripping the door frame, giving it a shake. "Probably a deer caught in the wind," I said, but my voice sounded hollow. Lena glanced at Jade, who was staring at the trees, her mouth slightly open. Marco snorted, but his hand was already on his rifle. We checked the cabin, found nothing, and tried to settle back down. The dogs whined softly, their ears pinned back. Then it came, a crash so loud it felt like the world split open. A boulder smashed through the wall, splintering logs and sending dirt and wood shards flying. I scrambled to my feet, heart pounding, as another rock hit, this one grazing the table where we'd laid out our maps. In the moonlight, streaming through the broken wall, I saw them. 2 massive footprints in the mud outside, identical to the ones we'd found earlier, but now slick with blood that glistened red, black. The dogs went wild, barking and straining at their leashes. Marco grabbed his rifle and peered through the shattered wall. "There," he hissed. I followed his gaze and saw it. A silhouette, towering, maybe 6 feet at the shoulder, its fur blacker than the night. It moved fast, darting between trees, gone before I could blink. "No time," I shouted, pulling everyone back inside. Another rock sailed through the air, narrowly missing Jade's head. The cabin groaned under the onslaught, each impact shaking dust from the rafters. Lena shoved a cot against the door, barricading it as best she could. Marco fired 3 shots through the window, the cracks echoing like thunder. Howls answered from the dark, low, guttural, not animal, not human. We huddled together, the air thick with smoke and fear. The barrage didn't stop. Rocks slammed into the walls, one shattering the table, another scorching a beam as it skidded across the floor. My hands shook as I gripped my rifle, my mind racing. What was out there? The legend of Ape Canyon wasn't supposed to be real. Seconds stretched into hours, the cabin trembling under the siege. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The silence was worse, heavy and wrong, like the forest was holding its breath. At dawn, the first light crept through the broken walls. The cabin was a wreck, splinters everywhere, the table in pieces, the air thick with the smell of scorched wood and blood. I stepped outside, my boots sinking into the mud. The footprints were still there, blood pooling in the deep impressions. Steam rose from them, curling in the cold morning air. Lena joined me, her face pale but steady. She pointed to the tree line where two figures crouched, watching us. They were massive, their fur matted, their faces strangely human but twisted with something like grief. A male and a female, their eyes locked on us. Slowly, they stood and lumbered into the undergrowth, leaving behind a raw deer carcass, its throat torn open, blood still fresh. None of us had seen it killed. I turned back to the cabin, my stomach dropping. Where's Marco? Jade. Lena's eyes widened, and we tore through the wreckage, calling their names. Nothing. Their cots were empty, their gear untouched. Jade's flashlight lay on the floor, still on, its beam cutting through the dust. Marco's rifle was gone. We searched the clearing, the woods, anywhere we could think, but they were gone, vanished into the night. Covered in mud and shaking, I radioed for help. Lena stayed close, her hand on my shoulder, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "They're gone, Samir," she whispered. "We need to get out." When the authorities arrived, they found more footprints leading to the high crags, too steep for us to follow. Jade's and Marco's rifles were there, laid neatly on a flat stone like an offering. No blood, no tracks, no sign of them. Lena and I made it out, but we left part of ourselves in that canyon. I keep replaying it, the thud against the cabin, the blood in the footprints, those mournful eyes in the dawn light. I don't know what took Marco and Jade, but I can't shake the feeling that those things out there could have done worse. Maybe they let us go. Maybe they were protecting something we'll never understand. All I know is I'll never go back to Ape Canyon. Some places aren't meant for us. The woods are silent now, but I still feel those eyes watching.